What is going on, you beautiful bastards? Welcome back to the channel. This is Unnecessary Rambling. I am Brandon Sylvia. Thank you all for stopping by today to listen to me ramble about what I am playing, what I have been playing lately. Drop down in the comments below and let me know the games you have been checking out lately. Anything good stood out to you in the last couple weeks or so? Alright, so let's go ahead and dive into this bad boy. We got a juggernaut to talk about in today's video. We have God of War Ragnarok. I just finished Ragnarok, put about 25 hours into it, and did, the main story, a little bit of side questing, not much. I do want to still go off and venture off and do some side questing and see all that or not all, but a lot of what's left to discover in that world. I just wanted to really get through that main story. I was compelled by the main story. I wanted to see what happened before, I'm scrolling through damn Twitter or the YouTube comments and some shit gets spoiled for me. I wanted to go ahead and run through that. So I did just that. And so let me preface everything by saying I really liked 2018's God of War. I wasn't crazy about it. I really liked it. I appreciated just how fundamentally solid it was as a video game. It's about as solid as you can get with a video game. You know what I mean? There's very little that you can critique about it. I did have some critiques for it. I think that the enemy diversity, location diversity, it fumbled a little bit in that area. And I think with Ragnarok, it definitely improved in both of those areas, even though I still do think kind of standard enemies in Ragnarok weren't, I shouldn't say up to snuff. They weren't amazing. There were a few standard enemies that you battle throughout the game that are like really fun to engage with, and they all have like interesting ways to take them out and interesting, little perfect dodges you can make or perfect parries that you can make, and just the timing in those interactions can be interesting. But there's still a lot of other enemies in the game, or like little floaty enemies that you have to, Atreus can shoot an arrow at, a specific like elemental arrow, and then you just go and hit them one time, and then like that's how you take them out, like these little lizard things early on in the game. It's just, I don't know, it's not a huge detriment. It's not a huge negative or complaint that I have with the game, but it was still something where I was like, damn, the boss battles and all that shit is lined up beautifully and perfectly, and there's at least off the top of my head, I'm thinking 4 or 5 just very memorable boss battles in this game that like for sure will stand the test of time and be remembered for a long ass time. But some of the standard enemy encounters in this game did weren't all that great. But to counteract that, in terms of location diversity, which I thought 2018's game was lacking, Ragnarok cleaned that up for sure. You are constantly going to new areas, exploring new locations, and there are some sights to see. This game is a stunner visually. It is very, very beautiful with its landscapes and just its art direction, especially towards the back end of that game. There is incredible attention to detail and just beautiful vistas that you're getting to explore and see. It's not, to be fair, I don't think it's on the level technically or visually on the level of something like a Horizon Forbidden West or a Ratchet and Clank. Even with character models and stuff like that, I don't think the attention to detail is quite there in that regard. Like where you look at Horizon Forbidden West and you're seeing those characters and they're all, unbelievably animated, and just it's incredible how the non-playable characters and the main characters are designed with almost the same care and focus and polish, and it's not quite on that level with Ragnarok at all. Most of the NPCs, you can tell, are, especially like when they're delivering their lines and stuff, the voice acting isn't syncing up to what's being said, and just there's little things like that aren't quite on the level as like some of the most unbelievable quote unquote next gen games available at this point, like your Ratchet and Clanks and shit like that, or even your Forza Horizon 5s, where we're just, it's hard to compare those two styles of game, but just the locations in Forza Horizon 5 and the, just photorealism of a game like Forza Horizon 5 compared to Ragnarok, you can, I would still give the nod to Forza Horizon 5, Ratchet and Clank, Horizon Forbidden West, but regardless, there are quite a few moments in Ragnarok that is astounding, just to look off into the distance and see the scenery, and you're looking at the beautiful water below you, and just there's so many moments like that that are really a sight to behold and beautiful to take in. So I guess we're kind of rambling all over the place already, but all of that is to say I do very much enjoy the game. I think right now where I'm at on it, it would for sure be somewhere in my top 5 games of the year. I don't think it's number 1 for me, but it's definitely somewhere in that top 5. I think the story arc pays off incredibly well. I think it ends incredibly well. I think throughout the game, the pacing is pretty solid for it to be a 25-hour just main story, which I shouldn't say, more probably like 17 hours for the main story or something, I would say. And then I spent, a few hours just kind of digging off, doing some running around, trying to solve puzzles and unlocking the chests and shit. I love going around and trying to figure out how to unlock the different chests. That shit was so fun to me in this game. And that's actually a big point with Ragnarok. It felt like the puzzle solving was so much more pronounced and emphasized in Ragnarok than it was in 2018's game, where in 2018's game, it felt like, a lot of the puzzle solving was side content like those chests, where in Ragnarok, to progress through a lot of the game, you're having to figure out, how to solve these puzzles. And granted, you don't have to do much figuring out on your own, because Atreus or whatever companion you have with you at the time will definitely kind of hint you and push you along in the right direction to solving the puzzle. And I know that can kind of frustrate people. At times it can be annoying, where it's like, man, I haven't even thought about the puzzle yet. I'm still kind of just looking around, surveying the environment, seeing if there's more shit I can collect, more items I can grab, a health boost I can go and stomp on, some rage points I can go and stomp on, and you're already trying to guide me on how to solve the puzzle. And it's like, well, shit, you didn't even give me time to think about it. But being fair, there are quite a few times where I am stumped, or I was stumped in Ragnarok, and having that little hint did help. So I can't say it wasn't useful at times, but I do get why people are like, give me a minute to simmer and focus and try to solve these puzzles. But they are a big factor in how you navigate through this world and how you get from one moment to the next. And I would say that in the middle act of Ragnarok, I think there is a slight pacing problem, and I'm not saying it's 100% due to the puzzle solving, but there is a slight pacing problem that is coinciding with the puzzle solving, I would say, but it's also coinciding with some of those repetitive battle encounters, and it just, I don't know, there is a little bit of a slog midway through the game where it's like, okay, I'm doing a lot of backtracking. I don't think the map is incredibly, I don't think the map is great. I don't think the compass is great, and I definitely do not think that, no spoilers, but there's an item that you have to interact with later on in the game that kind of guides you as a compass, and that can be incredibly tedious, and just because you have to totally slow down when you bring that item out. And I don't know, just it really kind of puts the pace on halt a little bit. It slows the game down quite a bit, and I don't know, there was a pacing drop off midway through the game that started to make it feel more stretched out than it was. But with that being said, for a 25-hour game, it does go by fairly quickly, especially when you get past that little middle act. Man, that final act just breezes by. It's paced so well towards the end, and everything feels so important. The battles are so compelling and engaging, and you're constantly like wanting to see what's next. It's one of those ones where when you get about 5 hours or so out from the ending, you're just not wanting to put the controller down. You want to see that whole thing through in one playthrough. It's really, really remarkable, and it all culminates and comes together in a beautiful way. Obviously, not going to spoil anything for you guys at all here, but it's performances across the board so good. I think that Atreus throughout, or I always say Atreus throughout the entire game nailed it. Freya really, really stole the show. A couple other solid performances that I won't go too much into, but I think Kratos comes alive towards the back end of that game and shows a slightly different side of himself that I wasn't really expecting. And it's cool that with this story there are a lot more moments of humor and tension breaking, and when you're just in the moment interacting with these characters in a bit of a lull and a bit of downtime, it's nice to hear like playful banter back and forth and having a little bit of, comedic moments in there, getting a little chuckle. I'm not saying you're going to bust out laughing, but there's a couple moments in there where you're like, damn, that's really funny. That's really well written, and just kind of good sort of, especially Kratos. I think Kratos really shines in that, and Atreus kind of fucks with him a little bit, and it's just a good little back and forth dynamic there with Atreus and Kratos. But I think out of everything with Ragnarok, my favorite thing about the game is actually just playing the game, just being in combat in this game with I feel like that's probably the biggest difference from 2018's game to Ragnarok, where the battle arenas are much bigger and allow for much more freedom and fluidity, where like you can have your blades of chaos and you'll be on one platform and there will be an enemy across on a different platform, and you'll use your blades of chaos to like almost zip line from you'll attach your blades of chaos and you'll zip line from your environment to where the enemy is, and you'll come down, smash down on the enemy, pop them up in the air, pulling off a chain of combos. And just the every weapon that you get in this game, every weapon that you use, you come out the gate, you have your blades of chaos and the Leviathan axe, and those two weapons are like it's so incredible to have a game where you actually want to use and upgrade every weapon that you get. I won't talk too much about later weapons in the game, but let's just say every weapon that you use in Ragnarok, you're like totally invested in it. And like I went through and upgraded every weapon that I could and got every single perk that I could. And like there's this rewarding system where you'll go in and find the upgrade that you like to use specifically, and then you can use it over and over again, and as you're using it more, you get to like a gold standard where if you've used it, let's say 50 times, you'll get a I don't even remember what they call it, but it's like an additional perk, and you can go in and say, okay, well, now this one specific ability, I'm either going to add an extra damage boost, an extra stun boost, an extra momentum boost, and so, or an extra protection boost, where you can pull that specific ability off in combat and not have to worry about, people or enemies coming in and damaging you while you're trying to pull off that move. And there's just cool perks and rewards that you get for playing your specific way. And we actually talked about that with Plague Tale Requiem, where similar to like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, the game evaluates you based on what you're doing and the playstyle you're using, and tries to reward you and give you more perks to accommodate the playstyle that you like to use. And I just love that adaptive kind of guide that you're getting, where it's like, okay, if you're doing this, this, and this, then we're going to reward you with this, this, and that, and completely kind of come together and allow you to play the way you want to play with the most perks and boosts to let you experience the best possible experience tailor-made for your style of play. And just shit like that is really fun. And there's perks later on in the game where like you can, throw your weapon, and if you nail the enemy, you can press triangle and then it'll trigger an explosion. And with the Leviathan axe, you can hold R2 and smash it into an enemy, and throw them like you'll kind of stick the axe into the enemy's gut, and then you'll spin them and throw them into a group of other enemies, and you can trigger a little explosion that way. And there's just so many cool little upgrades that you're getting to mess around with throughout the game. Like with the Blades of Chaos, there's this badass, you just hold R1. It's super simple, but you just hold R1 and you brutalize enemies over and over with this repetitive attack, and it's just doing tons of damn damage. It's not giving you like the range that you get with the Blades of Chaos, where you're swinging the blades around. It's just more up close, just smashing an enemy over and over again, and it's just visceral, gory. It's so much more gory in Ragnarok than I remember 2018's game being. Like, this is decapitation, limb dismemberment. Like I said, hitting an enemy in the gut with your axe, splitting them in half, seeing the top half of their body fly off in a different direction than the bottom half of their body. It is just so goddamn gory. And then you have like those up close moments where the special button will appear. I believe it's R3. You go in, you grab the enemy, and you're like splitting their jaw in half. Like, say you're battling a bear, you're grabbing their jaw and splitting it in half, and just, it is so much more gory and visceral and up in your face. Just the nature of it is a lot more intense than I remember 2018's game being. So combat across the board, I found to be quite a bit better. I loved that upgrading system that rewarded you for playing the way you wanted to play, and just kind of, just really letting you pick the best arsenal, the best loadout that you wanted to go into battle with, and having a blast with it. And every single weapon that you use in this game, it absolutely absolutely, like, it is just nailing every single one and makes all of them so goddamn fun to play with. And there's shit like where you can steal an enemy's elemental attack with one of your upgrades later on. You'll hold R2 and steal the elemental attack with a certain weapon, and then you can pummel the enemy with that elemental attack, and the same elemental attack that they were going to try to use on you, you're now flipping the script and using on them. And it's just, in a way, it feels more akin to the old school God of War feel, with that fast-paced, high-octane character action combat system, but it's still, it's maintaining that over-the-shoulder, tight, close perspective to where it never feels quite like a button-mashing action game. Like, you still are being intentional, and you're like, okay, well, I have my different, abilities here. I'm blocking. I'm using my R1, my R2 attack while I'm blocking. That's triggering these different attacks. Your rage meter and all these different sorts of things that you're having to account for and having to keep into consideration. And you are, perfectly timing your dodges, perfectly timing your parries and your blocks. And like, what other game really does blocking or parrying better than God of War? And like I said, that's not totally new to Ragnarok. With 2018's God of War, the parrying, the blocking, that shit was phenomenal in that game as well. But I think the faster pace, the more almost character action feel of this game is a little bit new. It's slowly, it's kind of blending the two. It's kind of blending the methodical and the character action into some sort of perfect combat blend. I really, really love the combat in this game. Now, with that being said, there is nothing in 2022's God of War that was like a mind-blowing, holy shit sort of revelation. Not really from story, not really from gameplay, not really from world building, other than like just looking off and seeing those holy shit, wow, that's beautiful moments. But there's nothing that you're necessarily doing or interacting with, or no moment that had me going like, holy fuck, I cannot believe that they made this leap that we're getting to now do this in the game. And that we talked about that on the 2022 Game Awards predictions, where it's like, when the foundation, when the fundamentals are so good, you know, it's hard to knock a game for being an iteration and a good iteration with decent improvements, but it's hard to know what 2022's God of War could have even done to really give anybody that holy shit moment, because we had it with 2018. And this is just an iteration, and I think that's fine. You know, I think that as gamers, we are sometimes a bit, you know, you can have your criticisms. Like I just laid out quite a few criticisms that I have for Ragnarok. I don't think it's a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination, but there is like this dismissiveness at times where it's like, if something isn't reinventing the wheel totally, it feels like gamers can kind of get hypercritical about it, and we don't remember that what we consider like the glory days of PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 games, there was a lot of iteration and a lot of games being cranked out in a year, 2-year time frames that were very similar to one another, and we were just happy to get another game in the series. And I'm not saying you need to have your expectations set that low where you're like, okay, well, whatever it is, as long as it's more, I'll take it. Like, of course, you know, have your expectations have to be higher than that. But I think the improvements that were made here are justified, solid improvements that make this game warrant, you know, it being a new release in the series. Like, this doesn't feel quote unquote like DLC to me. There are enough improvements here that justify the fact that it's a brand new game. And yeah, so I really enjoyed Ragnarok quite a bit. Am I the biggest God of War fan in the world? Am I like just dying to jump into these games one after another? No, I played the first one back in 2005 or whatever, and loved it, played the shit out of the first game. I played all the mainline games, but this has never been a series that I'm just like dying to stay connected to and just deciphering the lore, and it's just never been that game for me. I like all of them. I really like Ragnarok. I would say probably overall that I like Ragnarok more than I like 2018's God of War, but I'm not like totally over the moon about it. I think the combat is incredible. It's very, very fun, especially the boss encounters. I do think some of those sort of middling, kind of bland, standard enemies that you're getting thrown one after another can be annoying, repetitive. Like I said, laid out some criticisms for the game. I don't think it's... What is it at on Metacritic? I think it was at like a 95. Let's check. Okay, so yeah, it's at a 94 on Metacritic. I'm not there, like just being totally fair. I'm not there, and I wasn't that high on 2018's either. Like, I can appreciate just how damn solid it is across the board in terms of the technical like performance and shit. I didn't run into any bugs, didn't run into any glitches, no screen tearing, no frame rate dropping. Like, in terms of the performance of the game and making sure that their game released in a very tight, solid state, hats off to you for sure. But yeah, I'm not a 94 on it. I'm probably, I'm probably 89, 90, like very, very, very high 8s or very low 9s. I think I'm somewhere in that range, but I don't think, like, I don't look at a 94 and go, oh, that's overrated, da-da-da-da-da, it's trash, yada. Not that at all. I like the game a whole hell of a lot, but I'm a little bit lower on it than a 94. I'm somewhere in the realm of 89. But I could see, if you're just totally invested in this series, like I assume millions and millions of people are, then yeah, I bet it is a fucking 10 out of 10 for you, just to see the culmination and the conclusion to that story, which was, very, very damn satisfying and rewarding. All right, and next up, let's dive into Bayonetta 3. Finished that as well within the last couple weeks. And yeah, first off, let me just say, I do enjoy the game. I had fun with Bayonetta 3, but out of the three games, Bayonetta 1, 2, and 3, this is for sure my least favorite of all of them. Like, I just, I don't think I jived with a lot of the new additions here. They just really didn't click with me. And like early on when I made the video, the last what I'm playing, I talked about how I was enjoying, the upgrading system and the menu screens and yada yada yada. And like I think that the further on I went in the game, I realized how detrimental it was to the overall experience not having the ability to test out each move at Hell's Gate before I could buy it. It just, I don't think that was a worthwhile trade-off at all. Like, if I could pick to remove that skill tree totally and just go into Hell's Gate, pick the exact move I want, be able to test it off, and, in those little practice runs and shit, I would absolutely take that over the convenience of just having everything in a menu screen for you to go through and upgrade. I do think it's cool to have your upgrades right there, but it would have just been nice to, anytime you were learning a new move, just having the ability to practice it, to pull it off immediately and kind of, get the feel for your different moves immediately before you go into, before you go back into the gameplay. But, and even the kaiju, the demon summoning, that is cool. Granted, for sure, it is cool early on when you first see it, but they were so overpowered on the normal difficulty. And for me, if you're going to give me a loophole, I'm going to exploit it. You know what I mean? Like, I like the witch time. I like the frenetic sort of fluid combat of Bayonetta. But if you're going to give me the ability to just summon a demon and have them go and wreck shop, like, I'm going to take that loophole. So I just ended up, relying on it way too much, which you could say is my fault, but, or maybe I should have cranked up the difficulty or whatever, but it was just, it was simple and then effective. So I just kept going with it over and over again. I kind of wish you had a mode where, like, one time per battle, you could unlock the ability to use the demon summon, but like fully get to control the demon for like 20-30 seconds and not have to worry about Bayonetta at all. You just use the demon for 20-30 seconds and then hop back in to Bayonetta. I just feel like that could have helped the flow of combat a little bit more, because like when I'm controlling the demon but I'm moving around as Bayonetta trying to avoid getting hit, it's just like, I don't know, I would have rather just controlled the summon and got to use it a little bit more, maybe sped it up a bit more, because it was just like a slog. And that's really the thing, is that Bayonetta's all about that fast moving pace, and those demons are just slogging on screen, and which, like I said, it's impressive to see these giants pop up on screen and do battle and do damage. Like, that shit is cool. But yeah, I if I could have traded that off as well to just go back to standard Bayonetta combat, I think I would have, I think I would have done that as well. And not to mention the Viola combat, I think was a real downer across the board, where like I said, with the witch time mechanic being kind of the main driving force for me with the Bayonetta combat, with Viola not really having that, and similar with the combat just feeling a lot slower, a lot more sluggish with her, that took me out of it as well, having to play as her. Although I do think her exploration was incredibly fun, having the little web swinging shit. I thought that was excellent. Loved being able to explore as her. Would have just been cool to have some sort of slowdown effect with her. That way the combat could have stayed at that same pace as Bayonetta. But I also think that the puzzles, the focus on puzzles in Bayonetta 3 really were bizarre to me, where like it was a lot of emphasis on puzzle solving with Bayonetta 3, and they were like weirdly grindy in a game that's supposed to be, in my opinion, about just non-stop fun and progression and like, you know, having to slow down to just halt all the fun and the action to solve this weird, silly train puzzle. It just felt so goofy and out of place for Bayonetta. It just did not feel like what I was wanting based off of the first two games. But there's no doubt that this scale of this game is on a totally different level. Like, this is a humongous Bayonetta game, and just the different moments here with like the Godzilla-esque, War of the Monsters-esque, almost Rock'em Sock'em Robot style battles where you're towering over these entire cityscapes with these big ass monsters in these duels, and then like the you know, the 2D side scrolling missions that are all very well realized and laid out pretty well, even though, you know, if I'm being totally honest, is that really what I want from Bayonetta? Not really, but it was a cool little, you know, a cool break. You jump in, you have something new to do, something new to experience. They don't last too long typically, and it's just like a nice break in the mix of what you're expecting. So I can appreciate it, even if it's not something that, you know, I'm necessarily was super invested in. And you guys know that I'm a big location diversity guy. We talked about it with Ragnarok. I talk about it with pretty much every game that is, you know, excelling in giving you a lot of different locations to go around and explore. And Bayonetta 3 definitely does do that. There's so much on offer for you, you know, to see and to explore, just different settings here. It's you know, you have like your Tokyos, your Paris settings, you have your deserts, almost like a I don't even know, a fantasy or a sci-fi / fantasy setting. Almost gives you like a Mass Effect sort of vibe early on in the game, and you're able to explore all of these different settings with this one story, because the story is all centered around a multiverse, as are most stories these days. And I just gotta be totally real, I tuned out this story pretty hardcore about halfway through. It just did not click with me at all. And the first story I really enjoyed. It felt like a smaller scale, a little bit easier to digest and understand. The second story I really started to tune out, and then with the third game, I'm like, I think I'm just kind of totally out on the Bayonetta story arc. I appreciate the playing of the game. I think the moment to moment action is so goddamn fun in these games. But if I'm being totally honest, I like how the story is presented. I like the characters. I like watching them interact, but do I really give a shit about what they're saying or anything other than just to find those little moments of humor? Not really. That's kind of, I just have a sort of entry level understanding of what's going on in these worlds, and I'll just keep diving into the combat and having fun with that. But yeah, overall I enjoyed the game, although I do have quite a few complaints with it. It is definitely hands down my least favorite Bayonetta game so far, but still, with all that being said, it was still a really enjoyable experience. Okay, so on Metacritic, Bayonetta 3 is currently sitting at an 87 overall. And yeah, I would not be at an 87. I would be about at, if I had to put a rating on it, I would probably be about at an 80, 81-ish range. For sure, my least favorite of the trilogy, but still, fucking 8 out of 10, pretty damn solid. Okay, and last but certainly not least, we have the Chant. And this is actually a surprising horror gem, man. I really do think this is a hidden gem in the horror space. It's the cult horror game where you are... The setup is that your sister has passed away and you are grieving with that loss, and you end up going to this retreat with a friend to try to properly, you know, find a healthy way to grieve. And the setup is simple enough, but the actual deep dive into the cult here is pretty damn compelling, and Like, they even go into weird little details where you'll pick up notes throughout the world as you're just kind of walking around and you're like learning about the finances of this cult and how they're operating and how the leader is trying to exploit different cult members who have like rich family members and using that to their leverage. And there's just like little cool lore tidbits throughout this game. And there's a lot of, picking up different film reels and different notes and just getting a more deep understanding of everything that took place with this cult. But the pretty much you obviously get to this retreat, to this island, and you all perform this ritual together, and you're all kind of collectively doing the whole hand holding, sitting in a circle, and some shit goes very, very wrong. And from that point, the supernatural occurrences really start taking hold over this island, and you are needing to get the fuck off this island while also trying to be helpful and save all of the people you believe are sane. So that's kind of the general setup of the game, but the actual moment-to-moment gameplay is very similar to your Resident Evil third-person over-the-shoulder style games, although the act of combat in the Chant is actually quite a bit different than most things in the survival horror realm, where you're not given a handgun. It's nothing like that. You're all kind of in this up-close melee style combat scenarios with makeshift weapons where you're using like a fucking sage stick, or you're using like a fire lash, or like grabbing salt and throwing salt into the enemy's eyes. And so it's all like very kind of natural ways of defending yourself, but then it blends that with very supernatural ways of defending yourself with these abilities that you get later in the game that allow you to like repel and force enemies away from you, or stasis attacks that will lock enemies in and slow them down. And way later on in the game, you have the ability to like rise like dead cultist members from the ground who have been buried on the island, and they will come out and attack the monsters that you're fighting and be on your side to help you. It's some really crazy blending of using those very realistic natural ways of surviving and also these very supernatural abilities to your benefit in combat. And it's a simple standard melee system. Like, it's your standard kind of R2 to attack. You have your different you can throw like I said, throw the salt. You have some makeshift bombs you can throw and shit. And one cool thing about the combat is that you have a dodge button, and if you're not overly if you're not overwhelmed in combat, you can pretty much dodge out of the way of kind of every attack, really, for at least for the most part of the game, and pretty much not have too much damage done to your character. A little bit later on in the game, the combat ratchets up a little bit, gets a little bit more difficult, but early on you can kind of just dodge and bob and weave out the way of most attacks, and you'll be okay with that. But it is cool where if you are like super tense and you're smashing X over and over to dodge, your character will fall on her ass. So I think it's if you hit dodge more than twice, she'll fall down. And so you're having to constantly be aware of the fact that, if I'm in battle and I'm being overwhelmed, I also have to be aware enough to know that I can't mash X more than twice, or I'll fall. And it might actually be, I think maybe if you hit X twice, you end up falling. It might only be you can use it once, depending on the situation. But it's a cool little addition to where it makes the tension a lot higher at times when there's more enemies on screen and you're trying to bob and weave out of the way. But when you fall, you're like, oh shit, I'm even more vulnerable to attacks and more vulnerable to damage. So that was a really interesting little mechanic that I've never seen in a survival horror game, to my knowledge. So I appreciated that quite a bit. And the like I said, it is still in that adventure vein of your Resident Evil, Silent Hills, whatever. You're going around finding different clues, finding different items that you can combine with other items that end up making a key that you can use to get through the door. And there's a little bit of backtracking, but it's all guided and simple enough. It would have been nice to have a map on hand, though. I will say, like, certain sections of the game are a little bit too big to not have a map on hand, but it, I don't know, it's never incredibly tedious backtracking. Everything's laid out, and all the environments are fairly unique enough to allow you to kind of remember pretty easily where you've been and where you need to go, I would say. But yeah, you're collecting different resources that will allow you to use different resources for, like, you have to keep your mental state okay, your physical state okay, and there's different resources out in the world that you're going and searching for to use those in a moment where you need, kind of like, say, your first aid kits in Resident Evil. They have those things in place, but you also have, like, a panic meter that you're having to account for, and so you have, like, your mental and spiritual meter that you're having to account for and have items in place for those as well to use whenever you're being, whenever those meters are starting to dwindle down. So there's quite a few interesting, cool systems in this game. I think I would say, like, probably hour 4 to 6-ish, the final couple hours aren't nearly as good as the first few hours. The first few hours are really, really strong with the chant, and it makes a very immediate impression, and is just a really compelling game just off the premise alone. It starts off really dark, and it stays fairly dark throughout a lot of the game. It's fairly memorable and shocking that the story is throughout. So I actually enjoyed the chant quite a bit. Quite a few interesting mechanics. Visually, not bad for a smaller scale game. The cinematics look real good. The actual, a lot of the moment to moment kind of character interactions where it's not done by cinematics can look a little bit stiff, a little bit wonky, but it is a much smaller scale game. So don't go in expecting Resident Evil level quality or attention to detail, but if you're kind of craving something that is unique in the horror space, dealing with a new theme that we don't see a lot in games with the cultist simulator, if you will, I think that the chant is definitely worth checking out. And it's also not just another horror walking sim. There is real gameplay, real puzzle solving, real adventure elements that make you use your brain to kind of know where you need to go and to solve these different puzzles, piece these clues together and shit. So yeah, and I enjoyed the chant quite a bit. So, oh yeah, let's see where it's at on Metacritic. Okay, on Metacritic, the chant is currently sitting at a 71. I don't think that's a terrible score. I would be higher on that, though. I think I'd probably be somewhere like a 75 or so. I definitely think it's for sure mid-C's or so to me. I think it's a damn solid game. So, yeah, I would for sure recommend it, despite it not being perfect, not being super, super polished, not having the most in-depth, robust combat system or anything. I still do think it's for sure worth checking out. All right, guys, so that is going to be it for me today. I appreciate you all for tuning in, for stopping by and listening to my ramblings. I will be diving into Pentiment and Somerville sometime soon, and probably Evil West, and that should be the next video of what I'm playing. Maybe, probably not diving into anything off the backlog, but I think those 3 games will be the 3 main games for the next what I'm playing. So excited for the rest of November, and then obviously so goddamn excited to dive into December with the Callisto Protocol. Cannot fucking wait to get my hands on that game. So yeah, man, appreciate you all for watching. Let me know in the comments what you've been playing, anything good that stood out to you, any hidden gems, high recommendations. Let me know in the comments. Appreciate you all for tuning in. See you guys in the next video. Goodbye.